centre, Del. Okay, hopefully we're going to start. Hi Margaret in Ashkelon. Don't worry Adele, there's plenty of people here. Yeah, it looks like we're actually going to start 1:15. Jewish 1:15. JMC, Jewish Mean Time.
Okay, all set?
Crack on!
Friends, thank you for joining us here today. This is a non-political rally. Today's rally is about one thing. It's about solidarity. Today we gather not as political tribes or races or religions, but as people who stand united against anti-Semitism. I would like you all to reflect for a moment on what brought you here today. Why are we here? We are here because we believe in Britain, fundamentally. We believe in a Britain that is tolerant, decent, kind. We believe in a Britain that we fear is fading away. And the realization has dawned on us that we must fight. We must fight for it. Friends, the Britain I grew up in is one of the best countries in the world in which to live as a Jew. Those of you in the crowd who are Jewish are most likely the children or grandchildren of immigrants to this country, and they did not have it easy. My grandparents built their future here because they trusted in Britain and the British people. They trusted that this country would be a safe haven, that the values of the people here would mean that their children could thrive. And ladies and gentlemen, they were right. By the time I was born, it was a golden era for British Jews. But friends, the Jewish tradition is filled with admonitions that I wish we could declare obsolete. One warning in particular I find especially unbearable. It is the warning that we read each year during Passover. Every year, Jewish families read from the Haggadah that in each generation we will have to fight to defend our freedom against those who wish to destroy us. I wish that it were not so prophetic. And perhaps because of my wish that we could declare such things obsolete, perhaps because of that collective wish, in each generation, Jews somehow seem to collectively convince themselves that the suffering of centuries of generations of Jews won't be repeated this time, that the time we live in is somehow different. But friends, the time we live in is 2019, and 42% of British Jews have considered leaving this country, our country, because of anti-Semitism. We live in a time where one of our two main political parties is being investigated thanks to the work of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism's legal team by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We live in a time when just 35% of British Jews believe that a hate crime against them would be prosecuted even if there were enough evidence.
Put 50p in a metre.
I touched nothing. I trod on nothing. I didn't unplug anything.
Right. Oh, this is so Jewish. No. Somebody sort him out.
Friends, the button has landed in our hands.
No. Switch it on.
It's the turn of our generation to fight for British Jews.
Turn it on.
Today, we could do what has been done before. We could talk about which politician said what, which one of them is the biggest anti-Semite, but friends, we have had those rallies and today's rally is different. Today we are rallying as people who stand together against anti-Semitism. We are not demanding action by one body or another. We are seeking compassion, understanding, protection, solidarity. We are seeking it from the same British people whose decency and tolerance greeted my grandparents.
Oh, there we go.
Thank God for that.
Norman Collier.
This rally is certainly different. Friends, the baton has landed in our hands. It's the turn of our generation to fight for the future of British Jews. Today, we could do what has been done before. We could talk about which politician said what, which one is the biggest anti-Semite, but friends, we have had those rallies. Today's rally is different. Today we are rallying as people who stand together against anti-Semitism. We're not demanding action by one body or another, we're seeking compassion. We're seeking understanding. We're seeking protection, solidarity. We're seeking it from the same British people whose decency and tolerance greeted my grandparents. People who are baffled by racism and steadfast against it. Friends, we need that solidarity. We need it not just from the people here today, but from the entire British public. I want to tell you about something I experienced a week ago. One of those moments that should be mundane, but instead became seared in my memory. Last Sunday, I'd been working on campaign against anti-Semitism work. I'd been dealing with things from 8 a.m. And at 8 p.m. some friends came and rang my doorbell and said, "This is ridiculous, you haven't left your house, you need to come and get something to eat." And so they dragged me off to a restaurant, and we just went to a regular restaurant. And as I do sometimes when I'm preoccupied, I zoned out slightly, I couldn't listen to everything, I was zoned out slightly, and I started picking up snippets of conversations of other people in the restaurant. And it suddenly dawned on me that I was in a restaurant where it seemed every other table was a table with Jewish people. And at every table in that restaurant, every single one, they were discussing whether they had a future in this country. Those are the stakes in Britain today. Today, we are standing in this square before the Mother of Parliaments in the country of the Magna Carta. The country that stood alone as a light in Europe as the darkness and hatred of Nazi Germany enveloped the continent.
Just the two helicopters, Mark.
We stand here to say that Britain is better than this. We stand here as Jews and non-Jews alike to ask all of the people of this country to stand with us together against anti-Semitism. If you look behind us to the back of the square, you'll see at the moment that there's a photographer on a ladder. So if you turn and face him, I'd like to ask you all to raise your Together Against Anti-Semitism placards nice and high. And if I can ask everybody with a flag of all of the different flags, if you could just lower the flags for a moment. If you just lower all of the flags for a moment, please. Couples still up at the front. So it's just the placards, just the Together Against Anti-Semitism placards. If you've got a different placard, please just lower it for a moment. And we'll just hold for a second so that we can get the shot. I was going to do this at the end, but I'm hoping that the sound system will last that long. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can turn back and face me, it is my great pleasure. You can keep your placards high if you like. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, the brilliant lawyer who you know as television's Judge Rinder. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Robert Rinder.
Thank you very friends, thank you very much. Friends, I was asked today how I could be here. Friends, the question is not how I could be here, it's how we could not be here today. For far too long, we as a community, not just brothers and sister Jews, but our friends, our Christian allies, our Muslim brothers and sisters too. For too long, we as Jews have been in fear. We've sat amongst each other in anxiety, worrying, in fear, terrified of the future. And we as a creed have understood that what starts with Jews does never end with Jews. And therefore it's time to say enough. We collectively have come here today to be alongside and with one another on this ground, in this place, the cradle of democracy, the corner over there with Churchill, and over there Nelson Mandela. Ladies and gentlemen, my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. He believed in this country. He touched the very face of tyranny and knew what happened when the rule of law disappeared. It was unthinkable less than 5 years ago, unimaginable, that I would find myself standing here at a rally against anti-Semitism.
Doesn't work.
That, ladies and gentlemen, isn't just our tragedy. Above all else, it's our burden. It's our responsibility. It's a responsibility of each and every one of us to be a beacon, a shining beacon to the world, to remind everybody, whatever your creed, whatever your background, that when they come for the Jews, it doesn't stop there. Ladies and gentlemen, anti-Semitism isn't just on the rise. We've known of its dark shadow, its creeping horror for a long period of time. It's why we have our CST. It's why our children go to school behind barbed wire. It's why increasingly on social media people are under attack. It's why every single week, last week, 2 weeks ago, more hate crimes against Jews have been reported than ever. But we also know that that hate doesn't exist on its own. It exists hand in hand with growing hatred towards other communities too. What starts with us, ladies and gentlemen, what starts with Jews ends up creeping, ends up as a malignant force in society as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not here, friends, to talk about politics, but the truth of the matter is, sometimes it's impossible not to. It is a tragic reality that not long ago I stood on other ground. It was on the ground of Treblinka with the last survivor of that camp. And as I stood there with my mother, just the jagged suggestions, just the memory of what was underfoot, the last survivor placed his hand as my mum and I said Kaddish, the memorial prayer for what had happened. And as he reached around and touched my shoulder as I was about to say the names of my family, he said, "No, this is not for you. This is for Kol Yisrael. This is for every living Jewish person and for all of the people of the world, to remind the world of what happened." But you see, ladies and gentlemen, what ended up happening there under that sordid, vicious ground of Treblinka didn't start there.
For God's sake. Pathetic. Absolutely fucking pathetic. Yeah, it's on again.
That's what happens when you pay schnorrers, what can I tell you? Ladies and gentlemen, underneath that ground, with the jagged suggestions of what had taken place there, the last survivor of Treblinka, the last eyewitness, as he prayed to the world this would never happen again, what he understood is that that horror didn't start there. It started in anti-Semitic tropes. It started in dehumanizing Jewish people. It started when people shared platforms with those who called for the genocide of Jewish people. This is not about politics, but there are certain things that disqualify you from leadership of our country. Whatever your racism, whatever you do, when you call for the death, when you stand shoulder to shoulder with those that call for genocide, when you support the tropes that started as cartoons and ended up in the ground of Treblinka, you are disqualified from leadership of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that you are here is an act of courage. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, it is a tragedy itself that it needs to be an act of courage. Being a Jew shouldn't be an act of courage. It's not just the rich gifts, the threads that we've sewn into the tapestry of our incredible country. That's not an act of courage. The tragedy is that's how it feels today. That's how it feels to be Jewish. That to be Jewish requires us to be brave. That to be Jewish is something which is dirty, furtive, and dangerous. Well, we're here today to say that it's not. We're here today to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who support us. And the reality is there are millions out there. Millions. People of goodwill, of every creed, of every class, of every background, of every single religion that understands that what starts in a mural ends in murder, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, today I salute your courage. I salute our solidarity today. We here, each and every one of us, are here to remind the world, our collective souls, our neshamot, our spirits today. We may be only a few thousand in number, but as ever, we will remind the world that what starts with us, what starts with discrimination of Jews, is a dark creeping shadow that ends up on everybody else's doorsteps. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when we remain silent and they come for us, if we stay silent, when they come for everybody else, there's nobody left. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, thank you for coming today. Thank you for your courage. Above all else, thank you for reminding the world what we can be when we stand in solidarity with one another. Happy Hanukkah.
Let's have a thank you for Robert Rinder. Getting more and more equipped up there. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker needs very little introduction at all. She's an actress, she's a writer, you'll know her from television, you'll know her from radio, you'll know her from EastEnders, you'll know her from Doctor Who. I give you Tracy Ann Oberman.
It's amazing to see so many people here today. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tracy Ann Oberman. I am an actress and a writer. I am not a politician. I am not an activist. It is not my job to be standing here today. I don't really want to be standing here today. And yet I feel I have no choice. It seems incredible to me that in 2019, in the centre of London, I'm talking at a rally here in Parliament Square, talking about anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish racism, and how we as a community feel the need to come together with our friends and allies to feel less alone, less scared, less isolated, heard. We're all here today because we need to be seen, and we need to know that we're not alone. We stand by other minorities, for other minorities. The Jewish way has always been to stand against injustice, to give to charity, to never look the other way. Now we ask for the same privilege. This is my story. In the last 4 years, I've seen a growing rise in anti-Jewish hatred, recently culminating with people being attacked on public transport, rabbis beaten up in the streets, online, on social media, and in the real world. When I first became aware of it, I looked to the political class to sort it out. I saw them as the grown-ups, to march in and deal with it. But no grown-ups marched in. I started to see anti-Semitic, almost Nazi-esque tropes in the most surprising of places. Places where I would normally feel at home. At Glastonbury, 3 years ago, there was a poster talking about the evils of the Rothschilds and how all global ills stemmed from their control. No one took it down. Murals approved by politicians who should know better. Holocaust denial being advocated. I personally have been told that the Holocaust is exaggerated, that the numbers don't add up. If your family died in the Holocaust, why are you still here? Someone posted to me last week. Pictures of blood-sucking aliens grafted onto Star of Davids being reposted again and again by activists trying to reach as many people online as they can. Swastikas daubed onto Jewish artifacts put out with political messages. Jews and money. Jews and cabals. Jews controlling things behind the scenes. Powerful, rich Jews controlling, trying to manipulate global concerns. I was seeing this popping up on my screen regularly. I was accused of it myself. When I was 4 years old, my parents took me on a day trip to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, to Yad Vashem. I was far too young to take in or to understand what I was seeing, but I saw picture after picture of pits full of bodies, a pile of children's shoes, of teeth and hair. I realized that this was the end game of unchecked prejudice. This was the end game of institutionalized anti-Semitism, of racism, and the finale of when good people close their eyes and do nothing. In my student days, I marched against Clause 28. I stood with Viraj Mendes. I marched against South African apartheid. I fought against misogyny. I have always stood against my friends, against injustice and persecution. This is what I was taught. This is what I believe we as Jews have been taught. And I think that what has been the hardest thing to realize in the UK in 2019 is that normally when a minority comes under attack, you listen to them, you hear them, you protect them. What has shocked me is that we haven't been listened to. I've been told by countless strangers, by friends, old friends and colleagues, that what I have experienced isn't true, that I have an ulterior motive for speaking out on anti-Semitism, that basically Jews are not to be trusted. Last night at 10 p.m, before anyone knew what was going to be said at What if my training got me in? International, can you hear me? Are we back on? Yes, we're back on. Last night at 10 p.m, before anybody knew what was going to be said at this rally, a member of the Labour Party sent me this. A memo was sent out calling on fellow comrades and activists to fight against the smears that were going to be talked about today by ringing up their local radio stations. In fact, I'm going to read you just a little bit of it because I want you to hear it. I was so shocked. This is institutionalized attack. They were told to ring councillors' radio stations to say that what we were doing here today was a smear and an attack. That it didn't matter how small the radio station was, it still had thousands of listeners. That was before anyone knew what myself or Robbie or Tom was going to, or Fayaz were going to talk about today. I started to speak out on social media because I could see that these were platforms where people were using them as battlegrounds to radicalize people. The end result is synagogue massacres and murders in mosques. We all have to be on social media platforms to fight. The Jewish community are caught between the pincer grip of the far right and the hard left. Things that used to be mumbled into pints of beers in pubs or behind closed doors of gentlemen clubs are now spoken about and shared freely, without shame. Everyday anti-Semitism, everyday anti-racism has become a thing of my life, and I'm sure for many of you here. In Charlottesville, Louisiana, white supremacists marched with burning torches, shouting, "Blacks will not replace us, immigrants will not replace us, Jews will not replace us." Here in the UK, the left were and continue to post their thousands of images and cartoons about Jews, not seen since Nazi Germany and anti-Jewish propaganda. I myself have been called a Jewish bitch, a Zio shill, a paid Israeli Mossad operative with too many shekels in my bank account, that I speak out because I am a tax evader, that like all Jews, I just want to hide my money. I am a Zio whore and a baby killer. Every day I wake up to a barrage of abuse online because I will not shut up, I will not be intimidated, and I will not go away.
Bravo.
I've noticed that as a Jewish woman, I am attacked far more fervently and with ferocity than that of my male counterparts. The misogyny runs deep in anti-Jewish hatred. Luciana Berger, Margaret Hodge, Rachel Riley, Louise Ellman, Frances Barber, Karen Pollock, Isabel Housecroft, Sarah Gibbs, Tanya Gold, Maureen Littman, Joan Ryan, and even Tracy Ullman, who isn't Jewish herself, have at one time or another been insulted, been called a Zio collaborator. The men who stood, we have many allies, thank you, and you know who you are, but thank you David, Lee, Adam, Ben, Dan, Mark, you and all of you, you know who you are. Like many of us here today, my roots stem back to Russia. My great-grandparents met on a boat from Belarus when they were 15 years old. Their parents saved them money to send them third class to the UK to escape the violence of anti-Jewish pogroms. They were staunch trade unionists. They stood for workers' rights. They helped form the Labour movement in the East End. When the fascist anti-Semite Oswald Mosley brought his black shirt hordes to march through the streets of the East End, my Bubba Annie and her children, Faye, Leslie and Arnold, stood side by side with their fellow Irish, black and English working class neighbours to stop them. My great-grandma Annie called the United Kingdom the Golden Medina. She didn't want to go anywhere else. This was her home. It was a tolerant, moderate, inclusive home where she felt safe. We have many allies, and we are not alone. There are people who didn't have to stand up for us over the last few years, and yet they have. I'd like to say thank you to journalists like Nick Cohen, Suzanne Moore. Alison Pearson told me to tell you today that she receives letters at her publication from thousands of readers every day who say they are prepared to form a Praetorian Guard around the UK Jewish community.
Bravo.
Thank you also to John Le Carre, Joanna Lumley, Trevor Phillips, Simon Callow, those wonderful people who stood and wrote a letter and took the time to put their heads above the parapet to say no, not on my watch. Nearly over. Hang on. Cold fingers. Hang on. Here we go. The actor and writer co-creator of Goodness Gracious Me and a very good friend, Sanjeev Bhaskar, couldn't be here today. He wanted to be. But he asked me to tell you a quote and offer his solidarity. He said, "To stand against racism, prejudice, anti-Semitism is bigger than politics, bigger than academic debate, bigger than whataboutery. It's about the very soul of our society." As British Jews, we take on many forms: religious, irreligious, identifying, non-identifying, part of a community, or completely unaffiliated. But we have a right to be whoever we want to be. This is our home. We don't want to go anywhere. We don't have to go anywhere. We have a right to be here. We have a right to feel heard. We have a right to feel welcome. And we have a right to feel safe. Thank you.
Bravo! Brilliant. Brilliant. Harry. 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 Live going live on the mic. Harry. Great speech. Great speech. Humongous speech. Right? Yeah, fantastic.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Tracy Ann Oberman. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is television's Tom Holland, an award-winning historian specializing in antiquity and the early Middle Ages. His book, Dominion, covers the history of Christianity as a revolutionary force. Ladies and gentlemen, thank him very much for joining us here. Welcome, Tom Holland.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure it must seem the height of perversity that I've come here to show my support for you, Britain's Jewish community, and to do it by talking about the history of Christianity. But the reason I want to do that is because if we are going to understand how the hell it is we got into this mess, how the hell it is that in Britain in the 21st century we see a recrudescence of the oldest hatred, if we're to try and understand why it is over the course of European history hatred for the Jews, like kind of syphilis, keeps returning, we need to go back into the distant past. And that distant past in a country like Britain is deeply and profoundly Christian. Here we stand not just in the shadow of the Houses of Parliament, but over there of Westminster Abbey. And for 1,000 years and more, the values and the assumptions that have governed how the majority of people in this country have thought has been Christian. And of course, many of those values are shared between Christians and Jews because they derive from a common...
Oh, Mark, just do it for a minute.
He will not silence me. Those values derive from a scriptural inheritance that is common to Jews and to Christians. So if today our politicians take for granted that all human beings are equal, that they share in a common dignity, then we can trace that back to Genesis and the idea that God created man and woman in his image. And if there are parties that argue that they are for the many, not the few, then again, ultimately, that may derive from the saying of Jesus in the New Testament that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, but that in turn derives from the moral fury of the Hebrew prophets as they gazed at the arrogance of the wealthy and the sufferings of the poor. However, there are, of course, also scriptural teachings that Jews and Christians do not share. And if I could quote one, This is a phrase from one of the very earliest Christian documents to have survived, a letter to the Galatians by St. Paul, where he says that in Christ Jesus there will be no slave or free, there will be no man or woman, there will be no Greek or Jew. And again, this is an embodiment of values that our parties today uphold, the idea that there is no slave or free, the idea that divisions of class should be dissolved. And that might seem to express a concept of internationalism, a notion that all humans are equal. But I don't need to tell you as Jews that there is also in that phrase an implicit threat, because it may be that Jews don't necessarily want to have their distinctiveness entirely dissolved. And that over the course of Christian history has nagged at the church. And that was why for 2,000 years there have been people in the church and in the society that derives from the Christian inheritance, people who have been convinced that they are on the side of angels, who nevertheless have regarded Jews with deep suspicion. And that is why it is possible to be progressive and still to hate Jews, just as it is possible to be racist and hate Jews. And we in England, of all places, should be alert to this. Those on the left, as on the right, should be aware of the danger that always lurks, because it was in England, to our shame, that the most toxic, the most monstrous racist libel that was ever devised was invented. In 1144, in Norwich, a boy called William was murdered in a wood. And clerics in the newly built cathedral hailed him as a martyr. And they claimed that he had been kidnapped by the Jews of the city, who had slain him and taken his blood and mixed it up with their bread. And this libel, the blood libel, spread across England, and then it spread across the whole of Christendom. And it was condemned as a libel, not just by Jews, but by the very hierarchies of Christendom. It was condemned by an imperial commission, and it was condemned in the mid-13th century by the Pope himself. Yet still it persisted, and still it persists to this day. And the notion that a man who propagates this blood libel could be invited to tea by an MP, an elected representative who sits over there, let alone a leader of one of our major political parties, is beyond monstrous. It is beyond monstrous that this blood libel should be propagated. This blood libel that was dismissed as a libel by a pope back in the Middle Ages. But I don't want to end on this note. People have said that Britain is a good place to be a Jew. I am not qualified to say whether it is or not. But what I know is that after the Jews were expelled in 1290 from England after escalating hatred following the invention of the blood libel here, they were allowed back in under the protectorate of Cromwell, whose statue stands over there. And I, as one of your non-Jewish fellow citizens, want to express how grateful I am that that happened, how grateful I am for everything that you have contributed to this, our shared country, and to express my very, very devout hope that you will stay true to this country, that you will not despair of it, and that you will continue to do for it what you have done over the past centuries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you for Tom Holland. Tom Holland is one of the many people who are here today who is not Jewish. And I would like to take a moment to ask all of the Jewish people here today to thank everybody here who's not Jewish. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. I cannot tell you how much it means to us as Jews to know that we are not alone. That there are people in this country who love Jewish people, who see us as equal and want to stand up to protect us like you would any minority. Thank you. We have another of our great non-Jewish friends is ready here to speak to us. We've got Trupti Patel, who is president of the Hindu Forum of Britain. She's come specially, arranged everything at the last minute to be able to be with us today. Trupti, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.
I won't say I'm pleased to be here because we should not be in a free society have this kind of rally in any case. But I'm here, and the British Hindu community and we, for decades, existed in the harmony together in this country with the host community. We have similar journeys that when we arrived here, and we have watched so many things unfolding, in particularly in last 10-15 years. Two immigrant communities which is competing for the bottom rung. I would emphasize these, at the bottom rung amongst the prison population. Yeah, so we are the two communities, and we are the one on the top for contributing for this country's economic well-being. We, just our communities, have shared so many successes over the years. We belong to hard-working communities who strongly believe in promoting harmony and coexistence. Our communities goes long way back. Let me tell you, some of you probably would not. Every time in the history, in the past, India, or Bharat as many people call it, over 2,000 years ago, accepted Jews who were exodus. There are various synagogues in India. If you go and travel in Mumbai, in Calcutta, everywhere else, and you would not hear anywhere that you are not welcome, not a single time, and to the point that we made them aware that the Hindu swastika is red. It's not the Nazi swastika. Please do not consider that. Please do not believe in that. We also are in tune with each other because 26/11 Mumbai bombing, how many of you remember that? There was a synagogue, it was bombed, if you remember. Well, last week, many of my colleagues, many of my mentees, they all did a huge vigil walked from the Parliament Square, and they remembered the Jewish fellows who also gave their life in that bomb damage. So we share so many things together. We educate our children, we make sure we contribute properly in the country we live in, and this is not on that the campaign against anti-Semitism has to be carried on. We have to oppose it because bigotry within any political party is to be condemned, and we have to take inspiration from one of your leaders as well. We would not tolerate, you can vote for anybody you want, but make sure that we remember that we would not tolerate any anti-Semitism, any anti-Hindu hate. Namaste.
Namaste.
A huge thank you for Trupti. Ladies and gentlemen, our next and last speaker is a true friend of the Jewish people. He is the founder of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. I give you Fiaz Mughal.
It's a real pleasure to be here today, but we shouldn't be here in 2019. Frankly, what has gone wrong? And let me tell you a few things that have gone wrong. And I make a distinction between my co-religionists, members of the British Muslim community, and between Islamist extremists. Because the fact is today that the hard left and Islamist extremists actually are working tandem in a wide variety of areas to put somebody into power that frankly should not be in power. All right, and the fact is that Islamist extremists who believe in their values overriding British values cannot succeed and must not succeed. And Robert said earlier that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine, and let me tell you, not only is that a fact, that it doesn't start and stop there, it affects all of us. And that is why it is essential that we all, people of faith and people of no faith, stand up for the decent, human-centered British values that we are defending at this election. And it is depressing when I hear that half of British Jews want to leave or have considered leaving, because this country would not be what it is without you. It's simple as that. You know, I was a refugee in 1972, and I landed here as a 2-year-old child, kicked out of Uganda by Idi Amin's regime. And I've spent nearly 45 years of my life in this country. And the reason I was given the ability to live, breathe, work, survive, have a life in this country is because of your blood, sweat, and tears. You fought for my rights in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. You fought for my rights as a person from a different community coming to live in this country. You invested in this country. You gave up a lot of what your future was for people like me. So I take my hat off to you today and for every day that I'm in this country, because my Jewish brothers and sisters have given me a life. And when many Muslims came here, they couldn't find jobs. Nobody gave them jobs. Who do you think gave them jobs? When they came here and they didn't have any halal food, what did they eat?
Kosher.
Frankly, we're not just linked. We don't just have an umbilical link with each other as communities. You have sustained many of my co-religionists. You have given them the life they have today. So I applaud, but I also implore other communities to stand at this moment in time with you and to say that you will never be moved. You will never be moved. And there are two other things that I just want to end by saying. If the hard left thinks that they can carry on doing what they want to with Islamist groups and with people like Raed Salah, who turned up and shook and embraced a politician, then we will chase them out of the political corridors. We will find and shine a light on them wherever they are. We will send a message that Britain's values are not up for you. They're not up for sale. They will never be changed. And our defense of you, my Jewish brothers and sisters, will always stand firm. So I finish off by saying this. When they come after you, there are many of us who will stand on that front line. And they will never succeed, because Britain is not Britain without you. Thank you.
Bravo.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you to Fiaz Mughal. My mother told me to put a coat on. Ladies and gentlemen, our rally is at an end. I think that we have gathered here today and sent a very strong message. You know, we were in two minds about this rally. We were in two minds about it. People kept telling us, you can't have a solidarity rally. It's political. It's political to have a rally having solidarity with the Jewish people. And we said outrageous. What an outrageous thing to say, that it is political to stand. What an outrageous thing it is to say that it is political to stand with the Jewish people. Can you imagine any other minority where standing in solidarity with them would be considered a political act? Friends, I am so glad that we have all gathered here today. The crowd estimate apparently is 3,200 people. It's a very big rally. Thank you all. We've had people who have come here from Glasgow, from Liverpool, from all over Wales, from Manchester. We've had people who even, apparently someone changed their flights to come here in time for this rally. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to end with something that Jews do every week in synagogues up and down the UK. Now, many of you will have a flyer in your hand. If you can just have a look on the reverse of it, you will find something that is said by Jews every week and on every major festival. It's the prayer for the well-being of this country and the royal family. Now, why do we say this prayer? We say this prayer because we are proud to be British. We are proud to contribute to this country which we call our home. And in a time like this, I think there is no greater time than this for these words, praying for good counsel and good leadership of our country. Whatever it is you're accustomed to do when you pray, if you cover your head, if you clasp your hands, please do it, and please join me in all together reciting the prayer that's on the back of the leaflet that you have with you. He who gives salvation to kings and dominion to princes, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. May he bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. May the Supreme King of Kings in his mercy preserve the Queen in life, guard her and deliver her from all trouble and sorrow. May he bless and protect Her Majesty's armed forces. May he put a spirit of wisdom and understanding into the hearts of all her councillors, that they may uphold the peace of the realm, advance the welfare of the nation, and deal kindly and justly with all the house of Israel. In her days and in ours, may our Heavenly Father spread the tabernacle of peace over all dwellers on earth, and may the Redeemer come to Zion, and let us say, Amen. Thank you all very much for coming. I'd like to give a special thank you to each of our speakers again, to Robert Rinder, to Tracy Ann Oberman, to Tom Holland, to Trupti Patel, to Fiaz Magal, and to all of the volunteers who have put together today, to all of the volunteers of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, thank you. To all of the volunteers of the Community Security Trust who are protecting us today, along with all of the police officers who have kept us safe today, with all of the people who contributed to the crowdfunding campaign to make today possible. I'd like to thank everybody, especially Lloyd from Rigs and Gigs, who has managed to get our generator up and running again. I suggest strongly that if you want a sound system, you get it from Rigs and Gigs. If you want a generator, don't go to HSS Tool Hire, which is where we went. I'd just like to make sure that everybody from the media gets one last shot, so if I can ask everybody, raise your placards nice and high, and if you're a press photographer, if you can come up onto the stage without tripping on all this paraphernalia. So if we can have the flags down for a second, if we can have all of the flags down for a second, just the Together Against Anti-Semitism placards. If you've got a different placard, just lower it for a second. So have all of the flags down for a second, all of the placards nice and high. And together, let's say, Together Against Anti-Semitism. We stand in solidarity with British Jews. Together Against Anti-Semitism. We stand in solidarity with British Jews. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much indeed. Have a safe journey home.